Us this morning, Mike, is the former chief counsel for nominations to the Senate Judiciary Committee under Chairman Chuck Grassley. He's the one who ushered through the Brett Kavanaugh nomination, the nightmare of that. He's the founder and president of the Article 3 Project. That's A3P, and we commend it to you, all of their work. They defend constitutionalists, judges, and the rule of law. And with that long introduction, Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so there's some debate. A lot of people are talking now after Robert Hurt makes that announcement, like a week before we're having this conversation. Do you think that his report was good or bad, Mike? I mean, some say his conclusions were terrible, others inadequate, and others say he should never have said the personal things he said about Joe Biden. I just want to know what you think.
Well, it's amazing with Robert Hur. When he was selected by Merrick Garland to be the special counsel, I knew that he was going to cover up for Joe Biden. I know Robert Hur. He's part of the Rod Rosenstein, Chris Wray, James Comey cabal. He was hand-selected by both Maryland Democrat senators to be the U.S. attorney in Maryland. I held up his nomination when I was the chief counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee because I just knew he was part of that cabal. And so it was unsurprising that Robert Hur found pretty strong evidence that President Biden violated the Espionage Act and other statutes, including obstruction of justice, and then covered up for him. And so I don't know why the Biden people are so upset about this. The alternative for Robert Hur would have been to recommend an indictment of President Biden, which would have been a much bigger disaster for Biden than stating the obvious, that he's a demented, his mind is very much diminished as the president of the United States, and anyone and everyone who has a brain.
Well, let me read Hur's words in case people didn't follow this, because this is very important to all of us. Hur said, in his own words, he is a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory who would probably behave the same with a jury, thereby sowing reasonable doubt and a sense that Biden made an innocent mistake in keeping the documents. That sounds so much like James Comey. It really does, Mike. It just sounds like I'm surprised that a special counsel would make that kind of an assessment. Don't you guys deal with the law and not like your emotional assessment as whether someone can stand under trial? Is that part of the special counsel's purview?
Well, I mean, that's the problem with this Robert Hur. He's part of James Comey's world. He's one of James Comey's proteges, right? So it shouldn't surprise anyone that Robert Hur put out this mealy-mouthed report. It's very clear that Joe Biden committed espionage. It's very clear that he obstructed justice. It's very clear that he used these stolen classified records. He had 5 stashes of stolen classified records, unguarded for years, moved several times, accessible by their Chinese agent, the Biden's Chinese agent, and almost certainly used by Hunter to secure $10 million in Burisma funding for the Bidens, along with likely other money from China, from Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan. And what happens? You had the Biden Justice Department secretly working with President Biden and his personal attorneys to gather these documents while Joe Biden and Merrick Garland concocted a bogus pretext to do a home raid on President Trump for presidential records he's allowed to have in the congressionally funded and heavily guarded office of former president under the Presidential Records Act. This is all a distraction. It's all a charade. And the fact that Merrick Garland is pursuing President Trump for presidential records he's allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act, while he's ignoring President Biden for his stolen classified records that he's definitely not allowed to have, let alone use, it just shows that we have a politicized and weaponized justice system. Because remember, at the end of the day, you can have these special counsel, whether it's Jack Smith with Trump or Robert Hur with Biden, but at the end of the day, it is Merrick Garland as the Attorney General who decides whether to charge or not charge.
Well, of course, Biden came out with the so-called press conference and made his statement. He lost his temper. I'm going to play a couple of clips in a minute. What I didn't play was kind of right out of the box. He starts in on Trump. My situation's nothing. He volunteers this. Nothing like Trump's. Trump's a criminal, and he refused to cooperate, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, you're the attorney, and I know you have a bias. Nevertheless, I know you're fair. So what is the contrast? Help people understand why these cases are different. The classified documents, accusations against these men are different.
Well, they're different in the sense that Trump had the legal right under the Presidential Records Act to have his presidential records. And presidential records are any documents created or received by the president and his White House staff. And that includes classified documents sent to advise the president. Those are presidential records. Do we really think that we're going to trust the president of the United States with our most classified secrets? And then when we send those documents to the office of former president that's guarded 24/7, 365 by the Secret Service, that we're all of a sudden not supposed to trust that president? Contrast that with the vice president. He doesn't have the office of the vice president. He doesn't have Secret Service protection for life like presidents do. He's not allowed to have these presidential records. And Biden had not only presidential records from Obama as vice president, Biden had stolen classified records from his time as the Senate. I mean, I had a security clearance. I remember going into the Senate SCIF. I don't know how Biden managed to steal classified records as a senator. That means he must have stuffed them down his pants like Sandy Berger did. I mean, it is unbelievable that Joe Biden had stolen classified records as a senator. And it's not like he just had these stored away and forgotten in old boxes. He was using these. There is evidence he was using these with Hunter Biden to write a 23-point memo, as Miranda Devine at the New York Post reported. Hunter Biden wrote a 23-point memorandum to secure Burisma funding. This was about the geopolitics of Ukraine. How the hell would Hunter Biden, a crackhead with no background in Ukraine, come up with a 23-point memo on the geopolitics of Ukraine, but for the fact that he's using classified information that Joe Biden stole?
That's a good question, and I want to just say again what you just said. The big difference, of course, besides the Presidential Records Act, is that Joe Biden has documents from when, as you just said, he was a senator. He had no right to those documents. It's certainly a crime for him to take them home. And he had documents as a vice president who does not have, ever, the protections of a president in the Presidential Records Act. But now, this brings me to this, because right after he said that, Trump is much worse. His case is much worse, and he's angry. He goes into this. He's asked do you take responsibility for those documents, those top secret documents being in your garage and torn boxes and being available to people if they want to access them? Do you take responsibility for that? And this was his response, number 5.
I take responsibility for not having seen exactly what my staff was doing. It goes in and points out things that appeared in my garage, things that came out of my home, things that were moved not by me, but my staff. First of all, what I would have done is overseen the transfer of the material that was in my office, in my offices. I should have done that. If I go back, I didn't have the responsibility to that. That was my staff was supposed to do that, and they referenced that in the report. And my staff did not do it in the way that, for example, I didn't know how half the boxes got in my garage until I found out staff gathered them up, put them together, and took them to the garage in my home. And all the stuff that was in my home was in filing cabinets that were either locked or able to be locked. It was in my house. It wasn't out in Mar-a-Lago in a public place and none of it was high classified. Didn't have any of that red stuff on it. You know what I mean? Around the corners? None of that. And so I wish I had paid more attention to how the documents were being moved and where. I thought they were being moved to the archives. I thought all of it was being moved. That's what I thought.
Okay, so that's a combination. He addressed this thing of his staff being at fault for this twice. And Mike, I'm guessing that's what Miranda Devine was responding to in her article. I didn't get to read that. So just say again what the truth is on that issue.
That is just a flat-out lie that he's blaming his staff, and it just shows you what a bad human being that Joe Biden is. He's trying to blame his staff. He had 5 sets of stolen classified records from his time as vice president and as a senator. They were moved several times to several unguarded locations. They were accessible by their Chinese agent. They were almost certainly used by Hunter to secure millions of dollars in foreign bribes and other corruption for the Biden family. Hunter was the bag man. And remember, when Joe Biden's ghostwriter was recording Joe Biden's conversations, Joe Biden specifically talked about how this is classified information he's illegally disclosing to his ghostwriter. And when Merrick Garland appointed Robert Hur as the special counsel to look at this, the ghostwriter deleted the tapes of the conversations with Joe Biden, where Joe Biden is intentionally, willfully disclosing classified information to his ghostwriter. Joe Biden is a liar, right? It just proves that he's a liar here. And contrast that with President Trump. He's allowed to have his presidential records in the office of former president. That is why Congress gives them the office of former president. That is why Congress gives them Secret Service protection for life. That is why Congress gives them federally funded staff in the office of former president, because they have to go through their presidential records, including classified presidential records, as part of their duties as a former president. For example, former presidents have to look at FOIA requests to determine whether they're going to withhold documents from public disclosure for a certain amount of time or publicly release them. And that requires that they have their presidential records, including their classified presidential records.
All right, so now back to President Trump, because he's facing, I think, 91 criminal accounts, and one of them is on the documents that he had at Mar-a-Lago. And honestly, Mike, I don't know the status of that case. Can you tell us where that is now, those charges against him, and where the process is?
Well, I mean, the process is going through a normal process down there, because Judge Eileen Cannon is ensuring that President Trump, like any other criminal defendant, is getting a fair process. And that's very much angering Joe Biden and Merrick Garland and Jack Smith and these Democrat operatives who just want to railroad President Trump on bogus charges for espionage, for records Trump is allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act. They want to try to get him convicted before the presidential election. Remember, Joe Biden and Merrick Garland waited 30 months to bring these bogus charges against President Trump through Jack Smith on the January 6th case and the Mar-a-Lago case. And now they're trying to get these judges to ram through these criminal proceedings as quickly as they can. They don't care if there are discovery issues, if there are due process issues, if there are presidential immunity issues. Biden and Garland and Jack Smith's sole goal is to get a criminal conviction of President Trump before November 5th, 2024, because they know they can't beat Trump on Election Day, so they simply want to throw him in prison.
All right, changing the subject only to a different issue with President Trump, because this is so complex, and if we didn't care so much about what happens to him, because he probably will be the nominee, maybe we could even at someday find this all in a dark way amusing, because it's ridiculous, the number of cases that have been brought against him, and it's tragic to see how they are draining him and his resources and his family. But let's go to your home state, because in your home state of Colorado, Mike, of course, you know that they've been trying to remove President Trump from the presidential ballot. I want to play a clip from your Secretary of State, Gina Griswold. Let's just listen, because she made a statement out in front of the Supreme Court just a few days ago. Here it is.
We just concluded oral arguments in the Trump v. Anderson case, and it's striking, just steps away from the U.S. Capitol, where Donald Trump incited an insurrection, a violent mob, where Congress people ran for their lives. Donald Trump argued that all insurrectionists can be on ballots, and that even if he was convicted of insurrection, that he has presidential immunity. I think it's just so outrageous that Trump continues to think that he is above the law, above the Constitution, and above the court system.
All right, Secretary of State Jeannie Griswold from Colorado. Mike, just what do you think about that? What's going on?
Well, I'm a Colorado resident. I split my time between D.C. and Colorado. I spend as little time as I can in D.C. and as much time as I can in Colorado. And I know Colorado Secretary of State Jeannie Griswold. Let's just say that she's not the smartest human being on the planet, right? And what she just said is just laughably dumb as a matter of law, right? In order to disqualify an office holder under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, passed 155 years ago to chase out of office those who engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Union during the Civil War, Congress has to pass a federal criminal statute for insurrection or rebellion with a disqualification clause, which Congress has done. It's been on the books for 155 years. The last updated version was in 1948. So if they want to disqualify President Trump under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment for insurrection or rebellion, the House Democrats and the Biden Justice Department, including Jack Smith, spent tens of millions of dollars hunting for evidence of insurrection. It does not exist. Because how many insurrectionists go unarmed into a nation's capital, get to the Senate floor, walk through velvet ropes, follow police direction, take selfies, and don't burn down the place? January 6th was a lawful protest permitted by the National Park Service that devolved into a riot. The only way you can disqualify under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is to bring federal criminal charges for insurrection or rebellion, get a federal grand jury to indict, a federal jury to unanimously find guilt with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, a federal judge to convict, and that conviction upheld by federal appellate judges on appeal. That's the only way you disqualify under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. That is, according to precedent from then Chief Justice Solomon Chase in the Griffin's case 155 years ago. And if you listened to that oral argument last Thursday, it's not going to be a 6-3 case. It's probably going to be 8-1 or even 9-0, because you heard even Justice Elena Kagan and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, two leftists who obviously don't like Trump, who find this insurrection disqualification theory by the Democrats to be absurd on its face.
Yeah, and the other thing is not a single person of all the thousands now. I think it's, maybe approaching 2,000 people that have been charged on J6. No one was charged with insurrection. That no one was. So she's saying, as a matter of fact, that President Trump is an insurrectionist, and you just pointed out how foolish that is. So my question for you is, why then, why are the attorneys leaning so heavily on the immunity clause, rather than just saying what you just said, using the case against him being an insurrectionist, that there's no evidence, that all the things you just laid out? Wouldn't that have been a stronger argument, or no?
Yeah, I mean, they've made both arguments, but the immunity, presidential immunity, gets immediately appealed. It's immediately decided.
Oh, I see.
And then,
okay.
and the case is stayed while the issue is resolved. So there's no chance that Jack Smith is going to get this criminal case resolved before the presidential election, because there's the issue of presidential immunity. And this is an important issue for the separation of powers, and it's so much bigger than Donald Trump. And this is where the Democrats are being very, very short-sighted. Members of Congress, through the speech or debate clause in the Constitution, are immune both civilly and criminally for their official acts, including the outer perimeter of their official acts under Supreme Court case law in Nixon from 40 years ago. Federal judges are immune both criminally and civilly for their official acts, including the outer perimeter again. Presidents right now just have established civil immunity under the Nixon case from 40 years ago. They have not yet, the courts have not yet established that presidents have criminal immunity, because a president has never been criminally charged until Joe Biden and these Democrat prosecutors brought these bogus indictments against President Trump, 4 bogus indictments against President Trump. So the Supreme Court is going to have to take this case on whether a president or former president can be criminally charged for their official actions while they were the president of the United States. And this is why it's so important. If you think that you can charge President Trump for his official actions, What happens when we have the Trump 47 Justice Department, and the Trump 47 Justice Department wants to bring capital murder charges against President Barack Obama and now Judge David Barron, who was Barack Obama's one of his top legal advisors in the Justice Department, when they conspired to order a drone strike on 2 American citizens, including a 17-year-old. That would be capital murder for these extrajudicial murder of 2 American citizens if the president does not have immunity from criminal prosecution for his official acts, right? Or how about the Trump 47 Justice Department bringing criminal charges against Joe Biden and Secretary Mayorkas and others for their intentional dereliction of duty, their intentional disregard of federal law when they are mass importing and mass releasing illegally these unvetted migrants, including dangerous migrants from dangerous places in the world, and then the resulting rapes and murders and kidnappings and fentanyl deaths. Can Joe Biden and Mayorkas and others be charged for be criminally culpable for those deaths, for manslaughter, or even worse, like for felony murder, right? Do the Democrats really want to go down this path where you can have a president of the United States prosecute his predecessor for the predecessor's official acts as the president of the United States? It will destroy the presidency if the Supreme Court does not establish this.
Okay, Mike, just because I'm a little confused, not about what you just said, but about the Supreme Court's role right now. So there are 2 cases. The one is Colorado removing him from the ballot, and of course all the other states, as I understand it, who have tried to do that have failed, at least most of them. So I'm assuming the president is the one who appealed to the Supreme Court. And then we've got the insurrection, the other case that's being brought before the Supreme Court. So they're different. So one is arguing presidential immunity, but how about the Colorado booting him off the ballot? What's the argument there?
That's the argument that in order that President Trump, the Colorado Supreme Court in a 4-3 decision, the Colorado Supreme Court has 7 Democrats because Republicans just lost control of Colorado when they legalized weed and all the dirtballs from California and New York moved to Colorado, and it went all blue. So the Colorado Supreme Court is 7 Democrats. 4 of the most radical of these Democrats in a 4-3 decision kicked Trump off the ballot here in Colorado based upon an insurrection that supposedly occurred on January 6th, right? So Trump appealed that Colorado Supreme Court decision to the U.S. Supreme Court, and he's going to win there handily. It's going to be 8-1 or 9-0, and the argument's going to be that we have this, the Supreme Court, I think, is going to hold that if you want to disqualify, you have to use this 155-year-old precedent and bring federal criminal charges for insurrection or rebellion. There's no evidence that happened. That didn't happen here, so that case is easily kicked. The January 6th case with Jack Smith, there's also a January 6th case down in Fulton County, Georgia with Fannie Willis. Those cases on January 6th, President Trump has asserted presidential immunity, and he has said that it is his job as the president of the United States to take care that federal law is executed, right? And that's absolutely true. So when he is inquiring about voter fraud, or when he's contemplating replacing his attorney general because the attorney general is not looking into voter fraud, those are his official acts as the president of the United States. And you can't charge a president of the United States for doing his job. You can't criminally charge him for his official acts. You can charge him for his private acts, like if he, if he shot someone on Pennsylvania Avenue, you could charge him for murder because that's not within his official acts, just like you can charge President Obama, apparently, for capital murder for drone striking 2 American citizens without a court order. But that's the issue is that you cannot charge a president of the United States for his official acts, just like you can't charge members of Congress, just like you can't charge federal judges. And so that needs to be established. The D.C. judge, Tanya Shucken, ignored this. She said there's no immunity from criminal prosecution for presidents, which is just insane. The D.C. Circuit with 2 Biden judges and this 80-year-old Bush 41 judge went along with that and said, no, you don't have presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for their official acts. That is insane, right? So that's why the Supreme Court is going to have to take this case They are going to have to establish that any president, not just Trump, any president is immune from criminal prosecution for their official acts, just like members of Congress, just like federal judges. The Supreme Court will remand the case back down to Judge Chutkan, who will hold a mini trial on what facts are in what are the factual predicates, what are his official actions, what are his personal actions, right? And then you get rid of the ones that are his official actions, and if Jack Smith has a case left after that, he can proceed. But you have to have immunity from criminal prosecution for presidents of the United States, or you're going to destroy the presidency.
Okay, but then, of course, politically speaking and timeline speaking, Jack Smith now will not be able to rush that through, which is what he'd hoped to do as much harm. I think it was like during the March, the primaries that were taking place in March, they were all geared for a certain timing to hurt President Trump as he's running for re-election. It's just so convoluted. But let's go down to Georgia, because you did mention Fani Willis, and this is kind of the most timely in our discussion today. Well, I guess it would be a toss-up. But we're talking, you and I, on Tuesday morning, the 13th of February, and this will air tomorrow on the 14th. But on the 16th or 17th, Fani Willis's, the judge in that case, the judge had a statement. Scott McAfee made a statement yesterday that was pretty jaw-dropping, because he's trying to decide whether Fani Willis needs to be disqualified for the case because she brought in her lover, the special prosecutor Nathan Wade, to be the prosecutor in this case. And, of course, this case has repercussions for something like 14 others, John Eastman and Jenna Ellis and others. So there's a lot at stake here. And I just want to play, if I could, this is just briefly, the statement that Judge Scott McAfee made just yesterday. Let's listen.
Specifically looking at Defendant Roman's motion, it alleges a personal relationship that resulted in a financial benefit to the district attorney. And that is no longer a matter of complete speculation. The state has admitted a relationship existed. And so what remains to be proven is the existence and extent of any financial benefit, again, if there even was one. So, because I think it's possible that the facts alleged by the defendant could result in disqualification, I think an evidentiary hearing must occur to establish the record on those core allegations. So just to emphasize, I think the issues at point here are whether a relationship existed.
All right, that's the voice of Fulton County Superior Judge Scott McAfee, who's trying to figure out in his role as a judge whether Fani Willis should be removed from this case. Okay, so Mike, translate for us what that means.
Well, there's no question that Fani Willis is going to get disqualified from this case. So will Nathan Wade. This case will likely get tossed out, and then it will be up to a new prosecutor who is selected on whether that new prosecutor wants to refile these charges. But the problem with Fani Willis is she hired her secret boyfriend for a special prosecutor job where she paid him $250 per hour, $700,000 in counting, when she had prosecutors on her staff who had a salary who she could have hired. But she hired her secret boyfriend. She lied about it and said that she wasn't dating him when she hired him. She was. But regardless, she admitted that she hired him before they indicted President Trump, right? So she hired him. She came up with this sweetheart deal to pay him $250 an hour. She hired him before the indictment of Trump. They indicted Trump. She paid him before this indictment to collude with the Biden White House, including the Biden White House counsel. He billed for 24 hours on one day. That just shows you how shady this whole arrangement is. And with this $700,000 in counting that Nathan Wade, Fani Willis's not-so-secret boyfriend, has collected so far, he took her on these lavish trips around the world, including the Caribbean, including Napa, maybe elsewhere, right? And she's been lying all along to the courts about her relationship and when it started, and she's also lying about who paid for what. And so she has a financial interest in the outcome of this case. She has a financial interest in the form of these illegal kickbacks that she's getting from her secret boyfriend / special prosecutor, and it is per se illegal for a prosecutor to have a financial interest in their prosecution. That's what's going to get her kicked off this case. It's what's going to get her likely disbarred, likely facing criminal charges. These are very serious allegations she's facing, especially when she committed perjury with the court or allowed her office to misrepresent a lie to the court on her behalf. It is very Big Fanny is in big trouble in Georgia.
Okay, so just to drill down on that, you explained it, but I want to ask another question here. You said another prosecutor, by the way, I should say Fannie Willis ran saying she's going to get Trump. Before any of this developed, what charges or whatever she thought she was going to bring, she was smiling and has been very smug through this, at least in the initial stages, not so smug now, that she was going to get Trump. That was her platform. So if she gets thrown out, will this will be an election again will it be another election?
What should happen is the judge should dismiss the case. He can dismiss it without prejudice, meaning they can refile the case, and then the state will assign it to another prosecutor. They can bring in another prosecutor from another part of the state to look at these charges with a fresh set of eyes and make the determination whether they want to bring these charges again or not, right? And then all of these co-defendants, Trump and 18 co-defendants, all these co-defendants who pled guilty under pressure because they couldn't afford to face the state here, all those charges should get thrown out, and we should start from scratch. And if a new prosecutor thinks it's a good idea to bring a RICO case against the leading presidential candidate and 18 of his supporters for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election, which is allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887, twisting arms politically is allowed by the First Amendment. If it were a crime to object to a presidential election, Democrats would be in prison for objecting to Republican wins in 1968, 2000, 2004, and 2016. We don't see Al Gore and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton in prison for objecting to Republican wins, right? So this whole case is bogus. It's nonsense. But now we learn it's very corrupt. And so Fannie needs to go. This case needs to go, and they need to bring adults into the room to determine what to do with this case going forward.
Well, it's good news that at least justice in some large form seems to be looming, but it doesn't help President Trump, who spent millions, no doubt, on attorneys, plus his own stress. It's hard to watch. It really is, Mike. But listen, thank you so much. Is there anything that you know that I have not asked you that's happening now, or is this kind of wrap up what's happening now?
This is good, and I would say this, that what I've been saying for the last 19 months since the unprecedented, unlawful, unnecessary home raid on President Trump with the presidential records he's allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act. I've done almost 3,000 media hits, constant social media, constant opinion pieces, because I knew that this was very wrong what the Democrats are doing. They fear that President Trump is going to win on November 5th, 2024, and they should fear because it's going to happen. So they just want to eliminate him. They want to impeach him twice. They want to indict him 4 times for non-crimes. They want to illegally gag him. They want to bankrupt him for non-fraud. They want to have some crazy woman named Jean Carroll take away his money. They want to just take him off the ballot like they did in Colorado, like they did in Maine. Colorado with 4 left-wing judges on the Supreme Court, and Maine with an unelected non-lawyer Secretary of State. Shenna Bellows just doing this. Well, guess what to these Democrats? This is all backfiring, and it's backfiring badly, and President Trump will be back in the White House on January 20th, 2025.
Okay, Mike, that's a optimistic, good news shot in the arm. And by the way, Mike again is the founder of Article 3 Project, and you can see what work he does. I'm telling you, he's working constantly. You see him on the television all the time, just setting things straight, like he did. Hearing. Article 3 Project can be found at article3project.org with the number 3 written as 3. Article, not spelled out. Article3project.org is their website. I know they could use some financial help, and I can't think of anyone who's more deserving of your trust than Mike Davis. So, Mike, thank you. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
This is Sandy Rios of Sandy Rios 24/7.
This is Sandy Rios 24/7 on American Family Radio.